A while ago, I made a video that served as a beginner's guide to British politics. If you haven't seen that video yet, go ahead and check it out. That video has been very well received, and so I asked you all what aspect of British politics you'd like me to go further in depth with. And the answer came back: ministers and ministries. This is a fascinating topic because there's so much history that's led the UK to having one of the most unique, but perhaps also confusing setup of ministers. In this video, I'll take you through some terminology, I'll take you through the major ministerial roles, including the confusing sinecure titles, and then also the ministries that they run, and finally, I'll take you through the systems that hold ministers to account. So let's begin with the basics and look at some terminology. Starting from the very basics, the word minister refers to the head of a government department or a part of a government department. The department they run is a government bureaucracy that acts based on the laws of the land and usually delivers some form of service for the public, be it health, defense, education, etc., etc. In the UK, some departments are called departments, some are called ministries, and some are called offices. The reason is purely semantic and historical. There are currently 24 of these in the UK, some have specific portfolios like energy or foreign, while others are functional like the Cabinet Office. The UK government currently has 142 ministerial posts, with some being doubled up, meaning there's a total of 121 individual ministers. That's a lot. Actually more than are allowed to be salaried for the jobs. Only 109 ministers of any level are allowed to receive a salary at a given point, so some of the ministers currently perform their roles unpaid. They aren't all the same level of seniority. There are Secretaries of State, there are Ministers of State, and Parliamentary Under-Secretaries of State. Let's take these in turn. Secretaries of State are cabinet ministers. They run their own departments where other ministers and the civil service report to them. All Secretaries of State serve in the cabinet, but not all cabinet members are Secretaries of State. For example, there are some unique roles like the Prime Minister, Chancellor roles, the Lord Privy Seal, and a Parliamentary Secretary who are also in the cabinet, and a handful of others who attend the meetings. Secretaries of State must be either MPs or peers. These days, peers serving as Secretaries of State are uncommon, but David Cameron's recent tenure as Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs was a recent rare example. Secretaries of State and other senior politicians become members of the Privy Council, a body that serves to advise the monarch. Once you become a member, you are a member for life, and you're given the title the Right Honourable. This is all mostly ceremonial. The second standard level of ministerial role is Minister of State. These are mid-level ministerial roles that are given a chunk of a departmental portfolio. The number of ministers of state per department varies. Some don't have any, and others have up to 4. Ministers tend to be more mixed in terms of whether they're MPs or peers, some departments making a point out of having both so that the department can be represented in the House of Lords by a minister. In some rare instances, Ministers of State attend the cabinet. They aren't in the cabinet unless they also have a Secretary of State role or similar, but they attend cabinet meetings. This happens when it's a portfolio area that the Prime Minister deems sufficiently important to require attendance. Currently, that only applies to the Minister of State for International Development and Africa, Baroness Chapman of Darlington. But in previous governments, there have been many more. The third level of minister is Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State. This is the most junior of ministerial titles. Like Ministers of State, they are given a sub-portfolio within a department. Normally, they then report to the Secretary of State, and their portfolios can be ultra-specific areas reflective of some specific priorities of the government, like the current position of Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Devolution, Faith and Communities within the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And finally, let's get a few more terms out of the way. A parliamentary private secretary is a non-paid, very junior position where an MP is essentially made assistant or bag holder for a Secretary of State or other minister. This is considered a stepping stone towards a ministerial career. And then, quite importantly, you have permanent secretaries. These aren't politicians, but rather very senior civil servants who effectively manage the civil service of their given department and normally work very closely with the Secretary of State. These often go under the radar, but in ministries where the political appointees come and go very quickly, these permanent secretaries wield immense power. The permanent secretary to the Cabinet Office, the office of the Prime Minister, is a very powerful and influential person and also serves as the head of the civil service. This position is currently held by Sir Chris Wormald. And finally, let's quickly hammer out another term: sinecure. This is a title that's purely ceremonial, but grants the holder a salary and sometimes a seat in the cabinet. That sounds sketchy, but it isn't. Because of constitutional hurdles, sometimes it's hard to find a paid position for someone who does vital work. So what happens is that people are sometimes given sinecure roles so that they can get salaries while they carry out other important duties. We'll see quite a few of these in a bit. And that is, I think, the main terms we need to know for now. So let's go into some of the most prominent cabinet roles, starting with the Prime Minister. As I noted in my last video, the king technically appoints ministers, but in reality the whole system of government is centered around the Prime Minister, who in turn gets his power from a majority in the House of Commons. As mentioned, the Prime Minister runs the Cabinet Office, and depending on who you ask, the kind of distinct but kind of not Prime Minister's office, which are both based in 10 Downing Street. This office, and in turn the PM, sets the policy and messaging of the government. The Prime Minister runs weekly cabinet meetings with the rest of the cabinet and a select few other officials, and he also serves as the de facto face and voice of the country abroad, going on state visits and meeting with foreign leaders and dignitaries. This office, in its current shape, goes more or less back to Robert Walpole in the 1720s when, although it wasn't referred to as Prime Minister then, it was more or less created due to King George I's more hands-off approach to managing Britain. There has been a lot of thinking and writing done on the powers of the Prime Minister, with many arguing that the role has become substantially more powerful over the last century than it ever was previously, sometimes referred to as the presidentialization of the office. The Prime Minister is currently Labour leader Keir Starmer. The Prime Minister can be an MP or a peer, but it is increasingly rare for peers to be Prime Minister. The last time was Alec Douglas Hume, who became Prime Minister as a Lord, but decided to resign as Lord and run in a by-election so that he could serve as an MP Prime Minister shortly after taking office. The PM also has the titles of First Lord of the Treasury, a formal title designating that he is technically responsible for the government's finances, as well as Minister of the Civil Service, indicating his responsibility for government and departmental structuring and running. And finally, he also holds the title of Minister for the Union, a relatively new title suggesting his responsibility for cooperating with devolved governments. The Prime Minister can choose to appoint a Deputy Prime Minister. This isn't necessary and is sometimes used purely as a way to appease or reward another cabinet member for whatever reason. Starmer chose to appoint a Deputy Prime Minister, currently Secretary of State for Justice, David Lammy, seemingly as a way to soften the blow when he was demoted a couple of months ago from another office. Prime Minister is one of what are called the great offices of state, the four most prestigious cabinet roles. The second most prestigious of these is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. The Chancellor of the Exchequer is what is oftentimes in other countries referred to as Finance or Treasury Minister. Chancellor is just an old formal name for a senior official, and the Exchequer is another name for the UK's Treasury. The role is therefore responsible for managing the government's finances from taxation to spending, all at His Majesty's Treasury. This often means they are both often lobbied and disliked by other cabinet members who want more money for their departments. The office is one of the oldest in the British government, going back to the 13th century, well before the role of Prime Minister, back when the Chancellor of the Exchequer reported to the monarch. The office holder is responsible for the autumn budget, a massive deal in British politics where spending for the following fiscal year is decided. At the time of release of this video, we are quickly approaching this year's budget, which is set to be very dramatic. After the budget is written, before it's presented to the House of Commons, the Chancellor stores it in the famous red box that they get a photo op with outside 10 Downing Street. The Chancellor at any given time is carefully watched by the markets, and fears of irresponsible fiscal behavior can lead to financial turmoil, and reassurances of responsible chancellors can help soothe the markets. The current Chancellor is Rachel Reeves, who is also the first female Chancellor. Like with the PM, the Chancellor also holds another formal title, Second Lord of the Treasury, with the PM serving as the First Lord. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury is a unique title given to their second in command at the Treasury. This title holder does not serve in cabinet, but does attend cabinet meetings. This is currently held by James Murray. Now, let's turn to the Home Secretary. The Secretary of State for the Home Department is the third great office of state and is responsible for policy on law enforcement, national security, and immigration. This role is quite unique to the UK. In other countries, this department's responsibilities can range across the Justice, Interior, Immigration, or Defense ministries. The Secretary runs the Home Office. The current Home Secretary is Shabana Mahmood, and this office goes back to the 1780s. Until 2007, it also had the responsibility for criminal justice, but this was transferred to the newly founded Justice Department. And so let's turn to the final great office of state, Foreign Secretary. The Foreign Secretary, or formerly the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs, runs the Foreign Office. They are responsible for foreign policy, including the diplomatic network the UK has across the world, as well as foreign aid. This office was founded at the same time as the Home Office, going back to the 1780s. The office is currently held by Yvette Cooper. And that's the really big ones. So now let's run through the Secretaries of State. In order from the biggest departmental budget to the smallest, let's take the portfolio-specific Secretaries of State in turn. The Secretary of State for Work and Pensions runs the Department for Work and Pensions, responsible for benefit payments. The current holder is Pat McFadden, under whom this role has become a lot more powerful, with apprenticeships and further education now also falling under his remit. The Secretary of State for Health and Social Care runs the Department of Health and Social Care, running the NHS in England. This is currently Wes Streeting. The Secretary of State for Education is responsible for the Department of Education, which covers primary and secondary education, as well as childcare. This position is currently held by Bridget Phillipson, who is also, interestingly, Minister of State for Women and Equalities, a portfolio that's passed around departments but currently resides with Phillipson at Education. The Secretary of State for Defense, unsurprisingly, runs the Ministry of Defense. This is currently John Healey. The Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government is responsible for the similarly named ministry. This is currently Steve Reed. The Secretary of State for Transport is, of course, responsible for the Department for Transport and is currently Heidi Alexander. The Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero is responsible for the department of the same name and is currently Ed Miliband. The Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs is responsible for the department of that name and is currently Emma Reynolds. The Secretary of State for Business and Trade runs the Department for Business and Trade, but also serves as the President of the Board of Trade, a committee within the Privy Council. This is currently Peter Kyle. The Secretary of Justice is responsible for the Ministry of Justice, which runs the courts and prosecutorial services. The Justice Secretary also carries the title of Lord Chancellor. The original title before Justice Secretary was introduced in 2007. Lord Chancellor today is pretty much entirely ceremonial and comes with some quirky responsibilities like acting as the custodian of the Great Seal of the Realm. But this title is incredibly historical and one of the most important and prestigious titles in the United Kingdom. These roles are currently held by David Lammy, who, as I mentioned, also serves as the Deputy Prime Minister. Then there's the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, who is responsible for that department and who is currently Liz Kendall. The Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport for the department of the same name, which is also responsible for the world-famous BBC. This is currently Lisa Nandy. And then there are the Secretaries of State for Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, who run the offices of these devolved countries. These are currently Hilary Benn for Northern Ireland, Joe Stevens for Wales, and Douglas Alexander for Scotland. And those are all the Secretaries of State. But there are still others who are either in the cabinet or attend meetings. So let's go through the quirkier additions to the cabinet, starting with the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, which, be careful you don't confuse it with the Chancellor of the Exchequer or even the Lord Chancellor, is our first sinecure title on this list. The holder formally is tasked with governing and maintaining the estate of the monarch, but in practice the office holder passes these responsibilities on to the civil servants and is given a significant informal task by the PM. This has previously included serving as a type of fixer, as a policy strategist, or currently as a sort of delivery czar, tasked with ensuring other cabinet members pull their weight. The current office holder is Darren Jones, who also has the role of Minister for Intergovernmental Relations, essentially relations across departments, and Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, a new role invented by Keir Starmer for Darren Jones. All of his roles are based in the Cabinet Office, and so he doesn't run his own department. Another quirky cabinet role is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasury. The Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasury is another sinecure title, a title that frankly has nothing to do with the actual nature of this job. But the sinecure title gets the holder a salary and a seat in the cabinet as they carry out the duties of their other title, Chief Whip of the House of Commons. This makes them responsible for making sure that the government's MPs, frontbenchers and backbenchers alike, vote the way that the government wants them to. This can be through persuasion, through promises of cool jobs in the future, or threats of never getting cool jobs, or seemingly on rare occasions a combination of verbal and physical abuse. Yikes. The Chief Whip leads the informal whip's office of many more junior whips, many of which also serve under sinecure titles. The second in command is officially the Treasury of His Majesty's household. The third in command is officially the Comptroller of His Majesty's household. The fourth in command is officially the Vice Chamberlain of His Majesty's household. And then there's a cohort of junior lords of the Treasury, a group of junior whips. And then there are the finally appropriately named assistant whips, who are just even more junior whips. Some of these junior whips also sometimes serve in other junior ministerial posts around the government at the same time. The current chief whip is Jonathan Reynolds. A similar role to his is that of Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal. The Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal is another sinecure title. Formally, they're responsible for the Privy Seal of England, the monarch's personal seal. but the title holder also serves as the leader of the House of Lords, a role that sees the office holder ensure that government business progresses through the upper chamber. This isn't the same as whipping. It's more about scheduling, organizing, and prioritizing. The current holder is Baroness Smith of Basildon. And that's it for the current official cabinet roles. Now let's turn to the little handful of roles that we haven't already mentioned that attend cabinet meetings. Beginning with the Lord President of the Council. The Lord President of the Council runs Privy Council meetings every month for the monarch. It's kind of a sinecure title, but it does also come with genuine functions. It's a very historically rich title, but light on actual impact today. The more significant role that this office holder is given is normally, though not always, that of Leader of the House of Commons, responsible for scheduling, organizing, and prioritizing duties in the House of Commons. Both these titles are currently held by Alan Campbell. Then there's also the Attorney General. Formerly the Attorney General for England and Wales, because Scotland has a devolved justice system, and because the office holder also holds the title of Advocate General for Northern Ireland. This role is essentially that of the government and the Crown's legal advisor. This is currently Lord Hermer, and he runs the Attorney General's office. The office holder's deputy is the Solicitor General for England and Wales, and this is Ellie Reeves, who is actually also the sister to the current Chancellor of the Exchequer. And finally, the last current role to see cabinet attendance is the Minister without Portfolio. A Minister without Portfolio is, as the title suggests, someone who's a minister and gets a salary, but doesn't have a specific portfolio. The most common reason for this is that they serve as the government party's chairman, responsible for party organization and campaigning. That's the situation today, where the Minister without Portfolio is Anna Turley, who is also the chair of the Labour Party. Sometimes there are multiple ministers without portfolio. The Sunak government had two. One was the party chair. The other, Esther McVey, was sometimes called the Culture War Minister, tasked with doing media and fighting the culture war. And that takes us to a point. Previous governments have had other roles either in or attending cabinet. For example, the role of Paymaster General, another sinecure title oftentimes tied in with the Minister for the Cabinet Office, a sort of mid-level minister who works closely with the PM. This is currently Nick Thomas-Symonds. And sometimes special roles are made, like during Brexit negotiations when there was a Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, or in the lead-up and immediate aftermath of COP26 when the role of President for COP26 was made. Both of these were made cabinet roles. And a final organizational structure is, of course, the House of Lords Whip's office. The government's chief whip in the House of Lords doesn't serve in the cabinet or attend meetings because there's a lot less partisanship in that chamber. But the role exists, but of course as a sinecure role, that of Captain of the Honourable Corps of Gentlemen at Arms, currently Baron Kennedy of Southwark. Their deputy bears the sinecure role of Captain of the King's Bodyguard of the Yeomen of the Guard, and their little platoon of assistant whips are known as Lords and Baronesses in Waiting. But I also think that's it, which takes us to the last part of the video, accountability. Ministers are accountable to the Prime Minister, who is formally accountable to the monarch, but practically to his or her parliamentary grouping, and thereby the voters. But there are also some structures in place to more practically hold the ministers accountable on the day-to-day. The most cited one is, of course, the Ministerial Code, which is a document that sets out the standards to which all ministers, from junior all the way to the PM, should follow. There have been some informal versions of the standards passed around from the 1940s, and there was a secret document only for ministers to view at one point. But in 1992, Prime Minister John Major had a version published. Many updates have ensued since then. One of the big tenets include honesty, especially to Parliament. Lying is an absolute no-go and has been considered such for over a century and has ended quite a few careers. There are also rules about declaring interests, a ban on secondary jobs, responsibilities for one's own special advisors, a strict ban on leaking from cabinet meetings, and rules around integrity, which recently forced the resignation of former Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary of State for Housing, Angela Rayner, after she failed to uphold the standards when she didn't pay the appropriate amount of stamp duty on a new property. But who determines a breach? Well, at the end of the day, it is the Prime Minister, or if the PM has breached the rules, their parliamentary party. But to help the PM make determinations, Tony Blair created a position, the Independent Advisor on Ministers' Interests, or the Ethics Advisor. This is a legal expert hired to determine what constitutes a breach and what doesn't, and it allows the Prime Minister to leave judgment calls to an independent actor and to keep an arm's distance. Currently, this role is held by Sir Laurie Magnus, who pops up in the news for a couple of days whenever there's a massive political scandal every once in a while. Aside from these very intense ways of keeping ministers accountable, there are of course also the softer methods, normally tools held by the Parliament. This could be quizzing ministers in the Houses of Parliament or on committees, or it could be in the form of written questions from MPs sent to departments that must go answered. But of course these are less dramatic and attention grabbing as a good scandal and ethics investigation is. And with that, let's head to the conclusion. That's it. A perhaps too long, but also barely scratching the surface look at the ministers and ministries of the United Kingdom. It goes unsaid, but all the devolved governments of course have their own ministers and ministries, and that's its own whole separate video. Would you like me to make more videos like this one? I was thinking of doing a guide to the politics of Scotland. Is that something you would be interested in? And if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.